Howdy there, screenagers. We are back again. Another episode of the Canon, your favorite movie podcast, the one and only movie podcast, providing you with a watch list of the most essential movies ever made. You know the deal. You know why we're here. We've got another essential movie today. Joining me again this week, he was here last week. We discovered recently that he is the resident Disney animation aficionado at Screen Age Wasteland, Jacob Holmes. Welcome back. Long time no speak. How you doing? What's new since the last time we spoke, which was last week for Bambi?
Well, I think we ruined the magic in the last episode. You're watching these a week apart. We are recording them a day apart. We're recording this on the morning of Mother's Day to talk about one of the worst mothers in movie history.
But a stepmother.
A stepmother.
Important distinction. Yeah.
Yes, and she's not the real mother, so.
Yeah. Weird way for us to spend Mother's Day weekend talking about Bambi and Snow White. Bambi, a movie famously about, or a movie that famously includes a scene where a mother dies, and then Snow White, a movie famously about a really terrible stepmother. So, not the best way for us to be celebrating. Luckily, people are listening to this way after Mother's Day, so like they don't really have to worry about that. But for us, yeah,
we missed a spot in that recording yesterday. Bambi's mom was a great mom, so kudos to her.
Shout out to Bambi's mom. We shouldn't just celebrate good moms on Mother's Day, or just moms in general on Mother's Day. So there's always room to shout out Bambi's mom. Also, thinking about this and like these two Disney episodes, we typically, besides October and doing, sort of like more horror movies during that month, we never really do like themes for like months or, a few episodes in a row on the Canon. It's usually just like a pretty random mix of movies and like, their sequence within the episode ordering. There's really no like rhyme or reason to it other than just like, let's talk about these movies. Besides these two, where we wanted to talk about the two Disney animation movies back-to-back weeks. But now I'm wondering if we should have talked about Snow White first and then Bambi. But the more I think about it, I think we were right to do Bambi first and then Snow White. I don't know what you think.
I think it's fine. You could theoretically publish them in the opposite order, but people will be a little confused at the beginning of this video when we're talking about how we did Bambi last week. But
yeah, I think we'll stick. Also, all of the marketing has already been completed. Like all of the episode images and stuff have been completed, with Bambi being episode 14 and Snow White being 15 or whatever the numbers are. Okay. So we got to.
There you go.
Yeah. We're going real inside baseball to start this episode, which is great. I'm sure people love it. So we spoke last week about Bambi. We started that conversation a little bit talking about, we started the episode talking about just like a quick little update on your pole positioning series that you do for Screen Age Wasteland. And then we spoke a little bit about Disney remakes and whether or not there were plans for a Bambi remake. So for this episode, right, there was recently a Snow White remake that was released by Disney. And I feel like just to address that, I'm going to make the same joke that I made on last week's episode, to address the Dumbo in the room. Pause for laughter. Let's talk about the Snow White remake from this year, which I don't think will be a player in any Oscar or award races, but I feel like
Razzies?
Just talking about that remake, maybe some Razzies, yeah. An interesting place to start, just to like get that out of the way. So what did you see the Snow White?
I've seen the live action. Did you see the live action?
No, no chance at all. There's no way that I would spend my money on that.
Well,
Disney's not getting a cent out of me to see another live action remake.
I think Snow White 2025 is, if I'm not mistaken, is the lowest rated movie on IMDb, at least as far as like a movie that's like been seen by a bunch of people, or actually like,
Mm-hmm.
not some obscure movie that's just low on ratings, which is like a combination of three factors, which is so much review bombing, from all this off outside of the film stuff between like Gal Gadot and Rachel Zegler. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem is, there's no counterbalancing between that and people who have actually seen the movie who are also just rating it low on its merits. And so, like, it's just, I mean, I don't think it's the worst movie ever. It's like a lot of live action Disney remakes. It's just a really bland offering
Mm-hmm.
of the original, and I think a lot of the flaws of the live action trace back to the original, and the original flaws probably trace back to the fairy tale. Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think necessarily Disney made all the bad decisions that they made in the original movie themselves. I think those were just weird things. Like, this is from a weird fairy tale, and they
Mm-hmm.
just didn't fix them in post before they made this classic movie. And then that just translates into, but the new live action, no doubt, one of its worst problems is like the classic Snow White movie maybe is too essential for its own good, and it's
Mm-hmm.
live action is just so beholden to the classic, and like you can feel the Disney meddling in it. There's like, at some point there's like seven colorful bandits, including one that's Peter Dinklage, who obviously is a dwarf, or
Mm-hmm.
and it feels very much like those were meant to be replacements for the dwarves. But also, we
Mm-hmm.
have dwarves who are very uncanny looking and very strange, not as distracting as I thought they would be when I watched the movie. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, the only scene in the movie that's any good is "Whistle While You Work," and
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Zegler does a fine job as Snow White. Um, Snow White, as we may talk about, when we talk about the classic, not a lot of depth to go into from the original. I mean, what do you do with that character, unless you're given something to work with? And she does as fine as the script will allow. I think Gal Gadot is awful. Um,
And enough champagne to fill the Nile.
yeah,
You got to
she's
be a real
just
sicko to get that
so,
reference.
it is so, she just, how do you make a Snow White movie work if the evil queen is not a great performance too? I mean, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a key crux of this movie, and it doesn't work. And so, yeah, basically nothing works, and a whole lot of the story elements don't work, that are just the same story elements that don't work in the original.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I mean, we spoke about it last week where these live action remakes, they kind of offer nothing in terms of like breathing new life into these stories in any kind of like interesting way. And it's just like a cheap copy paste of these original classics that are classics for whatever reason, whether it be like the animation is like really emotive and inventive in what it's like expressing and communicating and all of those things, or a movie like Snow White, which we're going to get into, is like mostly just essential because it was so groundbreaking as the first feature length animated film. And beyond that, like, what makes Snow White essential,
Well,
which will be a question that
yeah,
we come back to over and over again. So like
and then
with the live action
another
remake, if
thing,
you're just copying, go for it.
and another thing is, the other thing that the classic has going for it is the visual artistry on
Mhm.
display. So when you make a live
Yes.
action remake with weird CGI and none of the painterly qualities that Snow White has, it's like you're chopping off like the one good thing about the original. So like,
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot to
Well, like,
land
I
on.
mean, these like live action remakes, and I hate just like harping on this so much because this is supposed to be a podcast that is like a celebration of film. But when you think about what the core purpose or intended the core intention of these live action remakes. It's just to make money, right? There's no one is approaching a Snow White or approach that Snow White remake as like, hey, Snow White is an interesting story and there are interesting things for us to explore here, whether it be like thematically or artistically that we want to put out into the world. Like, right? Like we think that this will be a really fun playground for us to explore XYZ. And that is not the case. And we can tell that that's not the case for any of these live action remakes. So, right, we're like the original Snow White, the intention or the question, the thing that we want to explore is like, hey, what if we made a feature length film that is entirely animated? Where like that wasn't a thing before. So, like, that experiment in filmmaking was like amazing. It was astonishing. It was like this really interesting way to approach the artistic expression or the artistic like endeavor of making films. And like the live action remake, it's just what can we do to make $1 billion? And
Right,
if
which
that is
is
your
funny because it just like flopped
yeah,
and good. Like Disney needs a swift kick in the pants for when it tries to make money and abandons art and gets rocked for it. Not that I have a lot of faith that that will always happen. They will get rewarded
mhm,
for plenty of unartistic movies, but uh, it's good to see it when it does. The and it's not like this is the first adaptation of Snow White to be trash. Like they have a really hard time adapting Snow White into anything good. Like the only adaptation I can really think of off the top of my head that does a decent, like pretty good adaptation of Snow White is Once Upon a Time, the series,
mhm,
the ABC series. That they do something fairly interesting, in part because it's so different and like that you have to work with so much different stuff in Once Upon a Time. It's not a straight retelling.
mhm.
Somehow by doing that, it gets them away from that need to just redo the story and actually makes the story itself like way better, like way better, like the parts of it that they
Yeah.
are telling.
Yeah. So I guess we can talk a little bit about the story since we're here, and that'll be a way for me to get away from just ragging on the current state of Disney and everything that I despise about them. So this original movie, obviously based on a fairy tale, and like that ends up becoming the blueprint for a lot of Disney classics. Is just like taking these fairy tales that are in the public domain, making them animated movies, and then like fully making them associated with Disney and like the Disney brand, which is like some of the most brilliant like brand marketing that's been done in like the 20th to 21st century. But yeah, what do you think of like the original story, like why they chose Snow White as a story to be their first animated movie? I'm not sure if you're familiar with like anything in terms of that background, but what do
That's
you
a
got for
great
us on that?
question. I remember when I was looking at Bambi, I remember seeing that there was talks about Bambi, like could have been the first movie from Disney, but they were like trying to figure out how to animate the animals in a good way. But I don't
Hmm.
remember exactly how. I'm sure there were a couple of options in the bag, and Snow White probably. I'm sure it had something to do with public domain
Hmm.
and to start with, and just being like, I'm sure there was some kind of element of assuming. I mean, this is like a children's movie, kind of, but also for families. But like, what story can we put to screen that would be like what can we put to screen that would be good for kids? And like I guess they just went to fairy tales. And so like
Hmm.
I guess they just picked Snow White probably because of the seven dwarfs and because they think the dwarves would probably be interesting to animate, and then they thought they could do some interesting things. And they did succeed in that. So um that was an interesting pick.
Yeah, we'll circle back to the dwarves, obviously, because they're essential to what makes this movie essential. So, as a story, you were kind of alluding to the fact that you don't think that the story itself is all that interesting. Um, what do you think of like the story and how it plays out in the OG 1937 Snow White and the Seven? Is it Seven Dwarves or Seven Dwarfs?
I think it's dwarves, but I could be wrong. It
Okay.
could be dwarfs. I could be wrong. The So yeah, the story of Snow White is basically like trash. Sadly, like there's good elements, there's good ideas of some of like conflict and drama, but the movie does maybe the worst job of giving us any of that. Like for one thing, the two main characters in conflict are Snow White and the evil queen, her stepmother, who literally never share a moment of screen time where the evil queen is herself. Like
Hmm.
there's there's never any screen time between the two of them where Snow White actually says, "Oh, you are my stepmother. I've lived with, and this is how." We never actually even get any idea of how Snow White even feels about her stepmother. Like we
Hmm.
get an introduction that says the basic like, "Hey, this is what's going on," and then we get Snow White. She's doing chores. All we know is that Snow White is like super like hopeful and happy and like naive. She's like basically a slave in a castle, and she's just singing her songs and dreaming about a prince coming, and then she sees one, and like none of the narrative plots, like there's so much interesting there. We never see the evil
Hmm.
queen actually being like have any like care about the kingdom part of it, like the power. Presumably she
Hmm.
like wanted power, but we don't really see that. We just know that she's super hot, and she's worried that one day her daughter will be like hotter than her, and that's the only thing we get. And like, you know, theoretically, like, and this again is a children's movie, so maybe you don't go here, but she's aging out of her prime, the evil
Hmm.
queen. Her daughter is aging into her prime, so you would think that that would play a role. But then when she goes to confront Snow White and try and get her to bite the apple, she's totally fine to transforming herself into the ugliest, oldest hag on the planet, and it's like she's obsessed
If
with
you
how
have
she
that
looks.
power,
It's
why
like
don't you
she's
just
obsessed
turn yourself
with her
into a
beauty.
more beautiful person? Yeah, and just leave it at that. Then
That
you don't
I
have to
had
worry
not even
about
thought
Snow
of
White.
that, but
Yeah.
like you know, like think about the substance, which is not. It's in some ways there's Snow White elements, right? Like
Hmm.
the older woman at war with the younger woman's beauty. Like the Elizabeth Sparkle can't even get out the door because she can't get her makeup right. She can't feel like she's beautiful enough. But the evil
Hmm.
queen transforms herself into the ugliest hag imaginable and goes and goes out and fine. And I'm sure, like you know, that scene in Emperor's New Groove where Yzma is just like giving the most elaborate, unnecessarily complicated plans to eliminate
Yeah.
Cusco. It feels like this is like the evil queen's first plan is extremely simple. I'm gonna order this guy to go kill her and cut her heart out. But then,
Hmm.
like after that fails, her plan is I will I will disguise myself and poison this or curse this apple or whatever it is that I'm doing, and she will go like comatose. But there will be like a clause, like an exception for her to. It's like why didn't she just stab her? Like
Yeah, it's a very complicated plot. Very well, not plot in like the plot of the movie, but the queen's plot to get to Snow White or whatever is it becomes overly complicated. It's yeah, it like oddly at its core is a movie about vanity and jealousy and being like it's just about the stepmother being the world's biggest hater. Like she has nothing, she has no reason to hate. Like Snow White's just like off like dancing with dwarves and the queen is like asking her mirror like who's the prettiest lady in the land and the mirror's like it's Snow White and the queen you know could just be like screw you mirror what do you know but instead decides to just like be the world's biggest hater. It's very strange, like why is she so obsessed with Snow White? Like just go live your life as queen, you'll be fine.
I mean,
um
and then like that's the thrust of the story is like Snow White on the run, but make sure to have this setup of where she's dreaming of a prince who happens upon her, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then she's still like, and then she runs into the dwarves for some reason, like, which doesn't really matter. But then she's like telling the dwarves about how she's waiting for this prince, because that's just in the story. And we have to talk about Prince Charming. Like, he just strolls up on what is canonically the hottest girl in this whole like region, and
Mm-hmm.
like sees her and immediately falls in love. Like, are we sure Prince
Mm-hmm.
Charming really has great intentions? Like, I mean, he's just out here chasing tail. Like, you know,
Yeah, he's like Bambi and Thumper.
there is no such thing as it's not about love. It's I am super attracted to you, uh, and if I ever find you unconscious, I'm going in for the kiss. So,
Yeah.
like,
It's so much weird about that. It's also interesting talking about the plot of Snow White as like a fairy tale and thinking of other Disney classics, and you know, the whole like coming upon a girl who's sleeping and falling madly in love with her or whatever and kissing her and waking up. I feel like Sleeping Beauty does that a little bit better. And then we think about
oh, I would
like
almost
a story
say
about
in a lot of ways, Sleeping Beauty feels like like they kind of got Snow White. They redid it a little bit, but right. Like,
yeah.
Maleficent is a better evil queen. The meet cute between Prince Charming and Aurora is better than the meet cute between Prince Charming and Snow White. The It makes everything make a little more sense, and so yeah,
But also stories about girls and evil stepmothers, Cinderella does that way better. So like, again, like Snow White, would it be essential if it wasn't the first Disney animated movie, if it didn't become that groundbreaking piece of cinema that like completely changed the history of movies for the rest of time? Like maybe not. If this wasn't the first Disney movie, like we would probably not be talking about it in
I think
the
you're
same
right.
regard. But it did
I think if
influence like
Sleeping
the other Disney greats. Like it influenced Sleeping Beauty, it influenced Cinderella, which it for like my money, like those are like better versions of Disney classic animated movies, like retelling old fairy tales. Even Beauty and the Beast, like that's probably what most people would like consider to be like the pinnacle of Disney fairy tale storytelling. They'd probably say that it's Beauty and the Beast. And, you know, obviously we don't get that if we don't have Cinderella, or not Cinderella, excuse me, if we don't have Snow White, and if Snow White isn't as groundbreaking as it is. But if like we got Beauty and the Beast first, then we got Snow White down the road. I don't think we're talking about Snow White in the same regard.
No, I think if you plug and place the Cinderella that we know, like if it was just unchanged, or the Sleeping Beauty movie that we know and it was unchanged, they would definitely be the same like zeitgeist, pretty much. Like, I mean, Sleeping Beauty already and Cinderella. I mean, they already are that zeitgeist. They would just have that heightened fact of being the first ever Disney movie that just like launches it even more into the stratosphere, because people would have been losing their minds the same way. But it's just a matter of like just timing. But yeah, I mean, it's easy now to think of like Disney as just this inevitable like thing, but I mean, Snow White was a total like most people did not think Snow White was going to work at the time, and so
Mm-hmm.
like
Well,
no
let's
matter what
talk
you
about
think
all
of
that
Snow
because
White, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the main reason for Snow White being essential is because it is such a wild gamble in filmmaking and what filmmaking can be. And like that's why it's essential. Like this movie does obviously work. Like the animation is great. The story is sufficiently good to like hold audience is attention for the hour and a half runtime. But before this, like this was totally unheard of. Having a feature length animated movie was like a bonkers idea. Like before that, it was like it was shorts that were like maybe you could get it to like 12 minutes, right? It was never seen as something as an art form that could hold an audience's attention for 90 minutes the same way that a live action film could. So, yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about like why Walt Disney was so intent on making this happen, why he thought that animation was like a great place to make feature length movies, what like the gamble was, all of the no's that he had like leading up to it, and how he was able to eventually make this movie happen.
I am not as prepared, not as prepared as you think I am. Um, like, I don't know what Walt Disney exactly. The thing about Walt Disney is, and we talked about this on the Bambi podcast yesterday, is he is like a visionary businessman, but he's also was a visionary artist. And I think
Mhm.
I just feel like he saw feature length films and was such a believer in animation and the artistry behind it that he just was like, we can do more than just the silly. Because I mean, most everything that they were doing at Disney was like, when you're doing a short, as classic as they are, they're like these silly slapstick, like kind of deals most of the time. And
Mhm.
like, I think he's just like, we can do something more serious and still have fun. Like, obviously, the dwarves are in there and they sing, songs and stuff. And there's that. But I mean, Snow White, in addition to being a feature length film, is also like a really serious turn for animation. I mean, like, I can't think
Yeah.
of. I mean, I don't really know like exactly the shorts. I just know kind of the general idea of shorts at the time, and
Mhm.
audiences must have been amazed not just to see the length and everything, but the seriousness of an animated feature.
Yeah, like it's not just Mickey Mouse like getting into hijinks or whatever. It's the serious story about pretty serious big ideas in a lot of senses, even though like we mentioned that they're not like fully fleshed out, but still, a movie about an evil queen who is jealous of this young woman and, her beauty and things like that. Like that's pretty serious stuff. And it's not just like, you know, okay, Mickey Mouse is doing some like slapstick stuff.
Yeah,
Or
like I
whatever.
don't think.
That's like a huge leap too. Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
great
like I
call.
don't think Stinky Pete was ever like cut out Mickey's heart and put it in this box to prove it. like like that's kind of a big step up.
Yeah, we're talking murder, we're talking ruling over kingdoms, and we're talking princes kissing sleeping girls. This is heavy stuff that's going on. We're talking
And
dwarves
I
mining.
don't know what. I know that Disney did some, like I've seen like there's like the Goddess of Spring or something. I've seen some of these shorts on Disney Plus and stuff that I hadn't
Mhm.
seen. But like for the most part, they hadn't it didn't seem like they had done a lot of like humans and specifically like very kind of realistic looking humans or like, there's
Mhm.
nothing very cartoony about their appearance. They're proportioned and like normal. So like that's probably also a kind of big
Yeah.
deal. In fact,
Oh,
you don't really see that
absolutely.
now. Now that you think about it, like even with like Pixar's latest stuff and Disney's animated like latest 3D stuff, like the Disney princesses and things, they have the big eyes and there's like a
Mhm.
cartooniness to the proportions that like Snow White has a certain like regality to the way the humans look, which is
Yeah, she kind
kind
of
of
just looks like a lady. There's
yeah.
obviously cartoonish aspects and in the design of the dwarves, but yeah, in terms of like Snow White and even the Queen, like they're kind of just like people. um,
Yeah.
which is yeah, pretty revolutionary in its own sense. Um, I think it was Duke who did the write up for Snow White on in the Canon on the website, and I think he mentioned in that write up, or maybe it was someone who was talking about what Snow White means to us in that section. And apparently he had to like take out a second mortgage on his house, and like he in order to get like extra funds in order to make this happen, because people were just like, dude, there's no way that people will want to show up to watch a animated feature length film. And he was like dead set on, no, this is a viable option for what filmmaking can be. So the gamble worked. And it's like hard for us to think about now, again, like 80 plus years after this movie came out, like animated features are such a classic part of our, cinema going experience and like understanding of cinema as a medium as a whole. Like there is obviously now an entire Oscar category for feature length animated films, and to think that like the entire history of that would not exist if Walt Disney and his crew and his team did not make the gamble on Snow White. So this is up there with like the early films of like oh fuck, what's their name? Why am I totally blanking? The Lumiere brothers, in like France, like right, like just as like significant as like the jazz singer for like Talkies or whatever,
Yeah,
it's
like
amazing.
it's hard
Like
to
this
even
movie is like,
imagine. It's hard to imagine. Like we don't know where we go in this current age that we're in. Like what could an equivalent revolution like that even look like? Like we can't even imagine such a new spin on how a whole like medium of movies basically. And it's
mhm,
interesting that Disney now, unfortunately, we talk about this reputation that they've earned for like putting cash over art,
mhm.
whereas in this case, Disney actually risked his cash for the art, which is just such a reversal, and really what we need. Because even if the story isn't that great, there was still a lot of artistry put behind that. And then of course you get things that are very contemporaneous to that, like Pinocchio and Fantasia,
Mhm.
which is really insane, because that's just such a um,
Yeah,
unique film. And so like Walt Disney was really in pursuit of art, at least in the early days.
absolutely. It's interesting. So I love Fantasia. Like that's probably one of my favorite Disney movies. I think it's just like such a wild experiment. But like you were talking about last week, it's not really like a cohesive, like full narrative or like classic feature length in the way that we would think about it. So like I was thinking about what would be the case if that were the first, feature length Disney movie. I don't think that animation would have blown up in the way that it has, um, with Snow White being the first. Like, right, you need a movie like that where it's a classic narrative plot driven movie that's like an hour and a half, where we have established characters, we have an inciting incident and like all of those things, we have dramatic tension and all that stuff to show us like, okay, this isn't a thing that we can do. We can make more animated movies. We can make animated feature length movies that sort of like operate and move in a similar fashion to the way that we understand regular narratives to work. But if Fantasia was the first one, people would just be like, dude, that's just like 15 shorts put together. That's not an actual feature length movie.
Yeah,
Even though,
I think they totally would have
yeah.
thought that. Yeah.
So it's just like, I think the choice to have Snow White specifically be the first one, as opposed to something like Fantasia or even Bambi, is it's, even though we don't think of the plot as being the best in the world, like I do think that choosing that story specifically for the first animated feature length was like such a smart call in order to make sure that like the rest of the history of animated movies could play out the way that it did. Like,
Yeah.
if it was Fantasia, like it would have been dead on arrival. Like we wouldn't have Into the Spider
Yeah.
Verse.
And I
But with
don't even
Snow
know
White,
that
we then were able to get to Into the Spider Verse.
exactly. I mean, like, the reason that Snow White is essential is name your favorite animated movie. That's awesome. that wouldn't exist without Snow White. Um, but, but yeah, even Bambi, like even if Bambi was the first movie, I think Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella could have done similar to Snow White and could have been. I don't think
Mhm.
Bambi may have quite worked because I think you needed something like a Snow White fantasy fairy tale, like it's more a little more epic along the epic lines than
Mhm.
like Bambi would have maybe still have been like it, and also no humans, right? So like it would have been things that people were a little more accustomed to seeing in a cartoon, um, versus like this kind of more regal fairy tale epic that kind of what Snow White did. Um, and then kind of it seems like Pinocchio being so close behind Snow White is almost like an also people treat Pinocchio almost like it's like the first movie too sometimes, but it's a little under Snow White.
Mhm. Yeah, what an insane run in those early days. Absolutely bonkers stuff. Let's talk about some of the characters. I know we spoke about Snow White a little bit. Well, actually, we haven't really talked about Snow White. I think you sort of alluded to the fact that
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a main character, as a protagonist, she maybe doesn't have all that much agency. Like, what do you think of Snow White as a main character, or I guess our protagonist in this?
Well, I think where the movie struggles so much is that Snow White's character is in some ways very reactionary. And she's also like her character, some beats of her character would work, right? Like she's a young girl. I don't know how old she's supposed to be. I'm guessing late
Mhm.
teens. And so she lives an awful life. She's like forced to just slave away at the castle. And it's nice that she's like hopeful and is still like cheery. And she dreams of like it's fine. Like people talk about the whole prince thing. It's totally fine that she dreams of meeting a prince one day and finding love. Like that's a normal part of life, just like it is in
Mhm.
Bambi. The problem is it doesn't really mesh with the greater plot of I'm on the run from my evil stepmother who's now trying to kill me because of how smoking hot I am. And like the prince could probably like take a back seat. And it's also weird. It's just the you create this conflict between her and her stepmother, but you don't provide like anything that shows they have any kind of relationship in the movie. Like when the huntsman comes and is like, "I've been ordered to kill you," Snow White just looks like shocked, like which would imply that she has some kind of decent relationship with her stepmother, who is otherwise shown to just be like cruel and abusive. And it's like, what is that? And we never really see her like she goes on the run, and we never really see her process that in particular. Like
Mhm.
she's scared in the woods on her own, but then when she finds the dwarf's house, she's like kind of like cozies up, and then she sees these dwarves, and she's like, "You want to learn how to clean house?" like, like
She's like a naive character. There's a lot
it's
of her characteristics are that of a fairly naive person, which is kind of sweet, right? She's like ignorant to the idea that her stepmom wants to kill her and, cut her heart out and all that stuff. And rather than like dwelling on that, she's just like, hey, I made some new friends and I can teach them how to wash and clean. And there's cute animals around. And like, I'll just hang out with them for however long I need to.
and there is a nice. I mean, there is something nice, like and pure about her naivety. Like she's just so. It's like that's kind of her whole thing. Like being Snow White is, in addition to her just insanely pale skin, she's also just
Mhm.
like completely untouchable, like by whatever darkness is surrounding her. It's just like completely. Um, it's not even so much that she's brave. It's just that she just like is is completely unfazed
Yeah.
by these things that should face her.
It's it's funny thinking of her as just like a totally aloof kind of character. Um, but yeah, it's not like she totally lacks agency. She does a little bit. It's also interesting that a lot of these like fairy tale stories that Disney ended up taking from the public domain and retelling as these classic animated movies are mostly about young women. And obviously, there's like, people who are like very well versed in the history of Disney classics and sort of like what they mean and teach young girls about like the kinds of people that they should be and stuff. But it is also interesting that like most of these movies end up being about young women when, we know that the history of filmmaking, especially like at this time in the 30s through, 50s or 60s or whatever it may be, was like very much so a male dominated space and like, mostly giving us stories about male characters. So even if the female characters that we're getting in these Disney stories aren't necessarily like the best aspirations or like the most aspirational characters for what women can be in like their place in the world, it's still just like an interesting little thing about these movies. Like you would think that the movie would really be about Prince Charming or the Huntsman or whatever, because they're
Yeah, I
dudes
mean
and we only tell stories about guys.
that is true. And if we're accepting the mirror on the wall as a reliable narrator, again, like Snow White is like just straight up the most beautiful woman anyone in this land has ever seen, and she's like her character has like zero, seemingly zero like cares about that. Like she doesn't ever
Hmm.
say anything about how she looks or anything. Like it's like totally beyond her how beautiful she is. Like so she's very down to earth, you can say.
Yeah, absolutely. The Okay, so we spoke a little bit about the Queen. We've talked about Snow White herself. The other characters, the other, named characters in the title of this movie are the Seven Dwarfs. And you rewatch this movie and you realize a lot of it is just like dwarf antics, which I personally loved. But what do you think about the dwarfs, their antics, and sort of like what they mean for this movie? And like that's kind of why it works for me is hanging out with the dwarfs.
Yeah, like hanging out with the dwarfs is really fun. The dwarfs are cool characters. The fact that they all have distinct personalities and all are also named after their personalities, and like they just go and like these dwarves are like living like bums, but they're like filthy rich. You would think because they're like just
Yeah.
absolutely loaded on diamonds like every day, and they just go to like there's so many questions about like I love how none of this is presented in any like any sensible way. Like they get up every morning, they sing their little song, they go to the mines. They don't appear to have a boss. Like they
No.
don't appear to sell the
Yeah.
diamonds. We don't know what happens to these jewels. They just go to just do it. Like I don't even know,
It's
if
just
they
work for the
get
sake of
money.
work.
They just like
They're
to
just
go in the mine. The children yearn for the mines, and I guess when they grow old, they continue to yearn for the mines. And
yeah.
and you have to wonder, like, do they have a mother? Who named them? Did they wait and see their personalities and decide to name them? Uh, Poor Sneezy, right? Like some of these is like you're happy and you're bashful and you sure sneeze a lot. Well, and worst of
Yeah,
all, I
that's
guess um, Dopey's like
your entire
Scar, like
personality is just like you like to sneeze. Not even like to sneeze. You're just always sneezing. Someone get that guy a
like
doctor. They do have a doc, and doc doesn't help
it,
Sneezy out. What's up with that? Are they
and like
brothers? Are they friends? What's
like
what's their deal?
the cousins, like what Doc, like everyone else is just like either a personality or a medical condition, and then like Doc is like learned, like for some reason.
Yeah.
The ridiculous, like the absurdity of these just combinations of things, like just works randomly for these dwarves. Like I don't know if they were named in the fairy tale or not, but the dwarves are
Hmm.
great. None of it really seems to have a lot to do with Snow White's story, other than she runs into them and they help her out. I mean, they're responsible for kind of killing the queen, which is
Hmm.
another weird kind of resolution of this movie. Like the dwarves just kind of kill the queen, kind of, um, because they're friends with Snow White, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, like watching the dwarves do their thing and just the like the visual iconography of the dwarves is awesome, and like it just sticks in your head, the colors and the names and the faces, like that really makes the movie in so many ways. It's just funny that they are so like disconnected from really any meaning to the to the movie. But what do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously said you loved like the hangout vibe with the dwarves. Like that's what kind of makes the movie for you.
Yeah, I love it. Obviously, I think the story of Snow White and her evil stepmother could have been fleshed out and explored for a whole host of different themes or narrative ideas or whatever, which we don't get, which is fine. That's totally cool. So then we end up filling that time instead with hanging out with the dwarfs. And that's kind of where the like classic short animated movie element comes into play, where it's just like, okay, we're going to hang out with these guys and we're going to watch them get into all kinds of silly stuff, whether it be them working or them, trying to get Grumpy to finally take a bath, whether it's them dancing with Snow White. Like those are the most fun parts of the movie. And those are all kind of drawn from our classic understanding of like animated shorts where it's just antics and hijinks and things like that. And I think because there was a history of the medium like doing that and that being sort of its main purpose, I think that's where the movie excels the most, because obviously like doing like a feature length narrative was new ground for animated filmmakers. So they're obviously still like getting their feet wet there. It's not as clean and concise as it ends up being down the line. So I think because of that, that's a big part of why the dwarf element of the movie ends up being the most fun. But yeah, I've like always
Well,
loved the dwarf. When I was in middle school, I had a shirt that had a picture of Dopey, but for some reason said Grumpy on it. So like I've always been a fan of them. Like you said, so iconic. Their design is like amazing. You see Dopey and you immediately know who he is, what his deal is, all that stuff.
like uh my dad has one of those like Disney memorabilia things that you can only get, that you really only get from like a shop at Disney World or Disneyland or whatever. It's like this beautiful
Mm-hmm.
art piece of the seven dwarves going across the log. And like not to be like Simba, I just can't wait to be king about it, but like I'm glad that that's
Mm-hmm.
going to pass down to me one day. It's pretty cool, pretty dope, pretty dopey. Um,
Oh,
but the
there it is.
but I think he revealed like really what it was is like when they approached this movie, they were probably like, we really want to do this dwarf part of this fairy tale. So they kind of
Mm-hmm.
really used they kind of just used the main plot as like a plot device to get Snow White to the dwarves. They're like, yeah, this thing, her mom is like mad that she's hot and she runs away, and like dwarves, like she's with the dwarves. This is awesome. She's gonna
Yeah.
teach them how to like clean up the house, and then kids are gonna watch it, and the parents are gonna be like, "This is cool. We're teaching kids how to clean the house through song." And and then we have to wrap up that thing from beginning earlier. So she's gonna come back as a like weird hag witch, and then the prince is gonna be in there, so he'll kiss her and wake her up, and the the dwarves can knock her off the cliff. Whatever movie,
Whatever.
like yes, we have these cool
That's it.
dwarves. Let's do it.
Yeah. The other interesting thing and great thing about the dwarfs, sort of going back to what we were talking about with the animation style, is they are very much so very cartoonish and exaggerated in their design. Like they're not just like standard humans. They have like the big noses and like the great costume design and all of that stuff. So like they end up being very distinct in in how it is that they're presented and how they look visually, which I think is pretty interesting compared to like what we were talking about with Snow White and Prince Charming and the evil queen just sort of looking like people. Which now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't know what that means about what we think about dwarfs and little people, but that they're like not human. I don't know if that was the intent, and
You
now I
know,
feel like a bag for saying that out loud.
it's an interesting thing though, because like the problem with I think dwarves is there are real people who have
I'm just
real.
gonna cut that little sentence. I'm gonna clip that.
I
The
think there's
problem
the problem is there's real people who have dwarfism who are short, and like that's where. But like there's also and it seems to probably go far back. Like
Mhm.
the dwarves that we see in Snow White are almost like a different thing. Like yes, they are short humanoid creatures, but they're not
They're like
necessarily like
elves.
human. Yeah, like it's like elves, like in Lord of the Rings, dwarves and elves are like not really like human. They're their own thing, and so like
They're like mythic creatures.
yeah, they're like mythic creatures, and the design differences in the dwarves and like the regular people like Snow White works just fine and great in the classic, and really struggled in the live action, and that was another part of the problem. You can't always translate that kind of thing, which is why animation is such an important medium. Um, you can have those two
Mhm.
characters share the screen in an animated film that you can't do in live action. It's like the struggles to do things like Scooby Doo, um, Lilo and Stitch. It looks like Stitch looks fairly good, like in design wise, but they struggle to figure out how to translate that when you're trying to approach reality. You know,
Yeah, well, I mean, the question then is like, are you trying to recreate reality, or are you creating this like otherworldly kind of thing? And like you're saying, that the dwarfs in this are more so a like otherworldly, uh, sort of like fantasy based kind of. I don't want to say creature, because it's weird because there are like real life dwarf people who and like little people who like are not just like mythic creatures or whatever for us to create,
right?
but it does feel like they are like removed from reality, and it's not supposed to be um seven dwarfs in the way that we think about just like like regular people who like exist in the world. Like they
Yeah, like
are
these guys are super old. They go work in a mine every day for no reason. Like they're clearly not like just like it's not. It's clear like they didn't just move out of the kingdom and just like grow old
yeah.
together and decide to do like they're a totally different thing. Like they have totally different rules about how they live their lives. Like they're definitely not just short like people who have dwarfism that were born in the kingdom and was like let's get out of here. Um, or
Yeah.
maybe they were banished from the kingdom because the evil queen can't have dwarves in her kingdom. But we don't explore that.
She's super bigoted against little people. We wouldn't be surprised if that were the case for the queen. The other great thing about those characters is and like just like hanging out with them and vibing with them is there's a reading of this movie where it's just like the best thing in the world is just like living with six of your bros and doing whatever. You don't have a care in the world. You're just going about life. You don't have to worry about where you're getting your money or your food from. You're just hanging out. Life is good. You dance around. Some lady comes up and she wants to hang out with you guys, and you're like, yeah, she's chill too. You can live here and stay with us. We don't
And
really care. There's no like they fall in love with her. It's just all good vibes.
it's just a straight like Snow White's just a bro, like bro white. And she's uh it doesn't matter how attractive she is, the dwarfs are just not on that plane. So like she doesn't have to worry about that. Like it's a safe space, you know.
Yeah,
Uh, and as long as Prince
they're
Charming doesn't come around.
yeah, they just see her as another bro. They're like, we got dopey, grumpy, sleepy, bashful, and snowy. That's it. That's the
Yeah.
crew.
Well, and then again, also Snow White sings them the song about someday her prince will come and is telling them all about how super hot and like awesome this guy is. So in some ways you could just say maybe we're taking this the wrong way. Maybe the dwarves are just like girlies with Snow White, you know?
They could be. The dwarves are also kind of for the girlies. It works either way, which is how it should be. the bros can be girlies, the girlies can be bros, and that's how it should be. As long as we're having a good time, making sure that we're cleaning the house and taking baths, that's what it's all about. That's that's my main takeaway from the movie is just good vibes only. That's what the dwarfs represent for me.
That's it. And the good vibes. There's such good vibes that they just ran those bad vibes straight off a cliff. They just can't
Yeah.
even. Bad vibes can't even exist in the vicinity of the dwarves. Just
Yeah, they
be gone.
immediately expel any bad vibes that end up being around them. That's so funny.
You know,
Um,
I think like the just like I was thinking about the queen's death, and like we already touched on this, and there's not maybe much more to say, but I don't think it was completely unheard of. I think the shorts that Disney did before this did have some dark visuals too, but there's just so many
mhm,
nice dark visuals in this movie. When Snow White is in the forest at night and the trees are like insanely scary faces, and then when the queen dies and these creepy vultures are just like smiling these big grins as they go down, and of course the
mhm,
poison apple, which the poison apple is just one of the most iconic movie items, just images. Like it's just
mhm.
something that the way the poison drips and makes the skull on the apple will just always be cemented as just a great cinematic image. And
Yeah,
so,
the
you
I
know,
was gonna
it's
say,
really cool.
I think the last thing that we should talk about, before we wrap up the conversation is the amount of iconic images from this movie. You think about things that everyone essentially like across the globe can like immediately identify or is familiar with that are from Snow White. You see the mirror, you know what that means, what that is. You see the apple, you know what that means. We've all seen images and pictures of the queen as the old witch. We've all seen pictures and images of the queen herself. Like her design is great. We all immediately understand and can clock the design of Snow White. The image of her sleeping in the glass casket, iconic. We all know it. The dwarves walking across the log with their um, picks, over their shoulders. We all know it. The design of Dopey, we know it. Design of Sneezy, we know it. Like just like totally filled front to back with absolutely iconic images. And part of it's because like this movie has been around for so long, but there are other movies that have been around for as long or longer that don't have as many images and just like moments that we all across the zeitgeist just like boom, we know that. We know where it's from, we know what it means, and like the history behind it. It's absolutely wild. But I don't know if you have any other thoughts on all of the
Yeah, no, I mean
iconic
it's just like
movie.
an untold amount of how this has seeped into pop culture. Like I don't immediately come up with examples, but you just know like Snow White is ever present in like all things references, direct references, indirect references. I mean, you have to really like if you were to not know this movie, like you would have basically have to have lived with no connection. Like you'd have to have like no TV. You basically have to not walk in any stores. Like Snow White has just never left our consciousness as like um in the public eye. Like it's just a crucial part of pop culture. Um
Yeah. It's
that
as
is just
ubiquitous as any other piece of pop
everywhere.
culture that has ever existed.
I my number one complaint with the live action movie, because you said this, they did not have the freaking glass casket, and
What?
I just about lost my mind. Like the glass casket is like such um maybe the most like beautiful image in the movie. Like that's just such a just like so ornate, and like the fact that it says Snow White and like engraved into it, it's just such a
Mhm.
cool like thing to not And no, it doesn't make sense. Like that they. I mean, I guess maybe some time has passed and they built this really elaborate glass coffin. The dwarves. I mean,
Yeah.
they have these abilities, but like, it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. You should have that glass casket because it's too beautiful to leave out. It just made me really mad.
Yeah, that's wild that they didn't include it. I'm sure that the live action remake is wild for a number of reasons, but that seems like a very silly choice. But once again, as I discussed, or as we discussed in last week's episode, I have totally lost faith in the Disney's ability to make interesting remakes of these classics because there is no real intention other than just, hey, let's make some money. I mentioned last week when we were doing recommendations that I am excited for, or maybe not excited, I am interested by the idea of the Aristocats remake that is potentially in the works because Questlove is at the helm, and I think that Questlove will be interested in having some sort of interesting spin or take or whatever it may be on that story that I just don't think has been um evident in any of these other ones, including.
No, they did not. And the really the tragedy, is talking about all the flaws, whether outdated or just like never that strong from the get go of the classic, is a live action remake of Snow White had potential. Like it has the potential to actually be really good, to be darker and more complex, and to like cut the prince out of the story. Like the prince does not add anything to the original Snow White. It's like not a problem, but it's not like it doesn't really have. It's just like unnecessary, and you could have a lot more of a streamlined plot that way. Which I mean, you'd have to change like the iconic ending of Snow White, but they already did that to a degree. So like, just abandon it. Like, don't. You're so like tied to it's too iconic that we can't not do it, and so you just like, then what are we really doing? Like, we already have that version. We don't need that version again. Give us something different, a different take. But um, yeah, that's. I mean, it's just one of these things where I really hated it because like I can see a really more interesting Snow White story being told that really focuses on Snow White's conflict with her stepmother instead of um, being so kind of tangential. Um, this tangential adventure that it is.
The lack of interest in like if you're gonna do a remake, it should be because there are new ideas that you want to breathe into a particular story. There's new ground that you want to discover or explore, and like we've said time and time again, it just doesn't seem to be the case here. But Jacob, before we go to recommendations, there's just two things I want to mention before we go about Snow White. One being just a quick shout out to David Hand, who is one of the directors of Snow White, and he also directed Bambi, and he was like a big player in a lot of the early Disney movies and including, some of their shorts and stuff too. And then with that, I was just looking it up, but this movie has 6 directors. Like they were all
That
on deck to make this movie. They
is
needed
crazy. Yeah, and
everyone.
it's funny you don't think about directors for these movies really like um whatever that for whatever reason you really don't think about directors of animated movies of a lot of those times until
Mhm.
you get a little bit of what Alan Menken and his creative partner escapes me right now, but the classics, the '90s classics that Alan Menken and the other really great artist I can't remember made. But yeah, that's really interesting. Kudos. I mean, really found his stride with Bambi.
Yeah, I think Bambi, that was just him. But a lot of these early Disney movies, it looks like they had multiple people credited as director. Fantasia has like 8 to 10 people credited as director. But then Walt Disney is like sole producer. So like when we think of like these movies in like the auteur theory, obviously it's with Walt Disney as auteur, even though he
Right.
has like he had
Right.
these massive teams of animators and other sorts of folks who are working on them, whether it be directors, cinematographers, and all that stuff. But oh, interesting. One of the composers on Fantasia is someone by the name of Ludwig van Beethoven, which uh, combination of Ludwig Göransson, our favorite boy from Sinners and the like, and Beethoven. Um, but yeah, just like massive, massive, massive teams of people who put their hearts and souls into these movies and gave us classics like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Jacob, before we go to recommendations, is there anything else about Snow White that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about?
No, I think we've covered it, except missed opportunity to have 7 directors, um, and just kind of
Yeah,
behind the
the
scenes where like all the directors have different personalities, and like one's happy and one's grumpy and one's just in the corner sneezing.
if it weren't also in the canon, one of my recommendations would be Seven Samurai, and I would make a joke about how each of the samurai represent one of the dwarfs. And Akira Kurosawa really he saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and he was like, okay, but what about instead of dwarfs they were samurai? What if Dopey was a samurai? That was that was what inspired him. But obviously, that is another classic that is also in the canon. So it will not be featured in our recommendations, but there will be other things featured in our recommendations, which we're going to get to right now. Um, let's do it. Let's recommend some things for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You all know the rules. Jacob, you know the rules. Recommending 3 things to check out for folks who enjoy Snow White. Of those 3 things, at least one has to be a movie. The other 2 things can be any and everything else. More movies, TV show, books, video games, albums, whatever. We like to get real weird and creative with it. So I think this time, well, no, let's do it how we did it last time, where I will go first since you probably have the more interesting and fun, exciting recommendations for Snow White. So for my first recommendation, I'm going to go with a movie, another great animated movie that is very, very, very obviously pulling so much from Snow White and other great animated fairy tale movies. It's a classic. It's one that is, I'm sure, near and dear to your heart because we're around the same age. So we probably grew up watching this movie. I'm recommending Shrek because, of course,
Yeah, I mean,
the,
Shrek is the film, and also Shrek is the film that put DreamWorks really on the map, I think, in a big
yeah,
way. Not their debut, I don't think, but that put DreamWorks Animation into like a serious position. Um, they didn't really follow through on it that well, but it put
yeah.
them in that slot, and really just great. I mean, Shrek Shrek is pretty great. Um, better plot probably than Snow White, and it's obviously got. I actually think Snow White is in Shrek, right? I mean, it's been a little while, but I think
Yeah,
Snow White
as with
makes
the
a cameo
dwarfs. Yeah,
as with the dwarves,
yeah.
and
The
it's got a
mirror
lot of
too.
great parody, a lot of parody on yes, the mirror. I forget what's in Shrek 1 and Shrek versus Shrek 2 and such, but the yeah, lots of great parody on fairy tale movies and Disney movies. So very much Shrek very much relies on our familiarity with Snow White.
Can I? I'm gonna workshop a take here. Shrek is the scream of fairy tale animated movies. It's a meta commentary about the genre that very much so operates well as a version of said genre that it is parodying or I don't want to say mocking, but existing as a meta commentary of.
Lovingly Yeah, lovingly commentating on. Yeah, I can vibe with that. And in the same vein, then Invincible would be the scream of superhero comics and
Yeah,
media.
exactly.
Yeah, sure, I like that.
What's your first
Um,
recommendation?
so my recommendations are going to be pretty wild and out there, compared to what I normally. I mean, so
Nice.
um, my first recommendation is a short film called Destino. Have you heard of that? Have you heard of this?
I have not heard of this.
So, Destino is an animated surrealist short film released in 2003 by Disney Animation Studios. And it is unique. And I'm literally reading this straight from the Wikipedia right now, um, just to
Hmm.
like make sure I get this right. It's unique in that its production originally began in 1945. Um,
Oh, damn.
a collaboration between Walt Disney and the Spanish painter Salvador Dali,
Oh,
with music written by Mexican songwriter Armando Dominguez. Um, it is a very surreal,
a dream team.
um, strange piece of art. Um, and I think it's a testament to the fact that Walt Disney was an artist, at his core. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's Disney really truly was in like pursuit of art beyond just like commercial success, although that was also important to him, and he built a huge empire. But check it out; it's on Disney Plus. So
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I definitely want to check that out. That is an amazing recommendation. I love that. For my second one, I'm going to go with another Disney animated classic, one that we spoke about kind of at length here, and I'm actually between two, so I don't know which one I'm going to pick. But I think because David Han, who we mentioned as one of the directors of Snow White, was also a director of this, and between our Bambi discussion and this discussion, a movie that I really, really, really want to revisit now and will probably revisit after this recording is Fantasia. I think that's probably like the best, from what I can remember, or the most like exciting experimentation in animated filmmaking that I can remember. Just like beautiful imagery, love the way that it moves, and yeah, I want to revisit it. So I'm also going to recommend it for everyone else to check out.
yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen Fantasia, you're really missing out. Or you've probably seen, like, I don't know that I've seen Fantasia in its whole form, and I sometimes I
Hmm.
get a little bored at the beginning of Fantasia, and I because I really wanted to get to Sorcerer Mickey, which is my
Hmm.
favorite, like my favorite Disney character. I mean, it's just Mickey Mouse, but Sorcerer Mickey specifically is like my favorite iteration. And just the matching of the music and the movement is incredible. I mean, it's an awesome artistic endeavor, and everybody should see that. That absolutely. So, so my second recommendation is really like would be really hard to find. So it is. Thankfully, though, it's on YouTube, so you can actually watch this in its entirety as well. Um, I'm just going to call it, I think it's Disney Sing Along Songs Disneyland.
Hmm.
It is a 30-minute long VHS recording of Disney mascots going around Disneyland and singing Disney sing along songs.
Hell yeah.
Released in 1990, including "Whistle While You Work," which is the very first one, featuring a good variety of the Disney mascots tidying up Disneyland, preparing for opening.
That sounds
And
awesome.
it's so great. It's such a nostalgic like itch that it scratches, and like it's that magic that I was talking about during Bambi of like the Disney parks, like that I
Mhm.
feel like the Disney parks are versus like kind of how they've
Yeah.
gone down a little bit today, and so it revives that sense of magic in the parks, which is nice.
I love that. I've not been to a Disney park since I was a child, and I don't know that I'll go back until I, if I should ever have kids of my own. Uh, but that sounds amazing, and nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and I want to say Disney parks aren't the same from as they were in the '90s, but I'm sure they're still rad. But I
Can
love
we
the
can,
idea of that
can we put a link to that YouTube video in like the bio of our
in the show
YouTube video?
notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll link it for sure. That's awesome. My final recommendation. I finally was able to think of something a little more out there and creative for a recommendation. So, a little happy for this one. It's not just another Disney movie. We spoke about how this is famously a movie about one of the world's biggest haters in the evil queen stepmother character. So I was thinking about other famous haters and things that they've done, and my mind immediately went to Kendrick Lamar, Not Like Us, the greatest hater anthem ever constructed, an absolute banger, a heater. I'm sure the evil queen hears that and wishes that she could have made a track as good about Snow White and how much she hates her. So if you're looking to be a hater and celebrate hating in all of its best forms, go listen to Not Like Us, because it's a banger still a year later.
If I had the talent to write a diss track for the Evil Queen on Snow White and then animate it as if the Evil Queen was like walking through her castle and doing and like Kendrick,
And
I
rapping
would
it, yeah.
totally make that. Like
That would be so good.
if
That
Disney
would be
could
so good.
make that, if Disney literally spent money and made a legitimately looking like the Evil Queen going through the thing and just absolutely eviscerating Snow White, it would go absolutely viral.
We
And
need to
it
do
would probably be more
a like
more worthwhile than the whole live action movie.
we need to figure out a way to do a like Weird Al style parody of Not Like Us, but for the Queen rapping about Snow White. I'm gonna start brainstorming that tonight. I don't know how long it will take me to actually put together something, but Jacob, we're on a mission now. We have to make this happen.
I mean, it feels like something that very much needs to exist, and the
Yeah,
only question is how we visually pull it off. We need
yeah,
if we have to have someone like dressed as the evil queen and like just and find some location that looks close enough and just to deliver it. Like it's something that feels like it needs to happen,
yeah,
and you've put that
100%.
idea out to the world now.
We'll make it happen for sure. That needs to be a thing. What's your final recommendation?
Well, so we've been talking about how Snow White is like if you try and analyze it at a story level, it's possibly not that good to like awful. Like the character arcs just not well handled. Like the central conflict isn't resolved really in a satisfying way. Even despite the fact that it's great art, but most importantly, it's particularly essential because of its impact and because of its place in film history. And so I'm
Mhm,
recommending another film that is also considered to not be very good. It's not considered to be like, yeah, I mean, like story wise, it's not good, but like its place in film history is important to understand. And specifically, it was very important for Disney. Um,
mhm.
and that is, of course, Josh Trank's Fantastic Four. Um, uh,
Is it actually?
not great, not great, but uh, important to understand if you're going to talk about film history because that is what reverted the rights to Fantastic Four to Disney which is probably going to make them a bunch of money this summer. And Disney is all about that money. Now that I'm done with the bit, I will do like a serious recommendation. um, we've got a
It's one of the
poison.
funniest bits that you always work in. Josh Trank's Fantastic Four.
I really tried to figure out how I was going to do this with Snow White or Bambi, and I just kind of found my lane on it. So, real recommendation: poison apple Halloween cocktail. Uh, very simple drink. So it's one of those things where you have to scroll up to the ingredients and then scroll down to like the recipe part. But it's very simple. Like all you need is like
Mhm,
some vodka, sour apple schnapp liquor, and a sour apple mixer and ice for
mhm,
shaking. And then going down to the instructions, you combine the vodka, liquor, and mixer in a cocktail shaker. Fill the cocktail shaker with ice. Cover and shake for a good 30 seconds to combine, and strain the drink into a serving glass. Very straightforward. You can garnish it with some uh, purple grapes for the contrast. The drink is a very nice like poisony green. And for
yeah,
extra like ambiance, you can apparently throw a few chips of dry ice in right as you pour the drink in, and it will smoke. And if you drink it before it's done smoking, you won't poison
mhm.
yourself, but you may uh, burn the inside of your organs. So, you know,
There's
um,
that.
if you want the full poison apple experience, if not, you
Yeah,
can wait for the dry ice to finish smoking and just drink responsibly. That's fine too.
amazing. I'm gonna keep that in mind for Halloween. That sounds great. Maybe I'll go as the evil queen, rapping Kendrick Lamar, drinking that poison apple drink. That'll be my Halloween vibes for this year. Um,
It's one of the things
amazing
that's like I
stuff.
don't even care that much about the drink. It's just like it looks so cool to have, like especially smoking.
Yeah,
Sinister.
absolutely. That'll crush at Halloween parties across the land later this year. Um, amazing stuff. Amazing conversation. Jacob, thank you again for joining for both this week and for last week. Our Disney animation aficionado. We did it. I think these are the only Disney movies non Pixar category that are in the canon. So great that we got to chat about them. Before we get out of here, do you have anything coming up on the website that folks should be on the lookout for?
Well, I'm behind a little bit on. I went and saw The Legend of Ochi probably 2 weeks ago now, and I've just been a little behind on getting my review out. I know it's probably pretty hard to find for most folks in theaters anyway, so I'll put it out. I also saw a Screen Unseen that ended up being Fight or Flight, so I am supposed to do a review for that as well. It's basically like a discount Bullet Train. So if you like Bullet
Nice.
Train and are needing to fill that itch, Fight or Flight may do it for you. And pole position coming up. I don't know if I'm going to have one for Monday or not, but it's a big week for pole position because Cannes is taking place this week. Or sorry, actually, I'm not thinking about when this is going to air. Yeah, I should have a pole position out recapping all the reactions from Cannes by the time this video is out. So yeah, check that out. Cannes is a super important week for the Oscar race. This is where um, Honora debuted last year, and so
Hmm.
uh, there's always like, what horse is Neon going to come out with of this? They've got sentimental value. I didn't mention sentimental value when we talked about that in Bambi's episode, but that's Neon's current horse that some people think might be a Best Picture contender. So we'll see reactions for that. Lots of stuff on the radar. So you can
Nice.
find all that at pole position. If you don't want to do all that research yourself, I will collect it for you.
Amazing. Yeah, so that should be out by the time this episode is out. Both those reviews will probably be out by the time this episode is out. So a ton of great stuff to look forward to. I think the day after this episode comes out, I will have a Canon write up on Vertigo, which I am very excited for. A great movie, and can't wait to write that up. And obviously can't wait for that eventual episode whenever we should have it. And there will most likely in the coming days after this is released be a review of Mission Impossible 8 from me. So those are the two things that we sort of have on the radar. There might be some other reviews or write-ups that I find myself putting together before this is released, but those are the two big things on my radar for right now.
Yeah, you reminded me. I have something for the Canon. I'm doing the Canon write up on Whiplash the end of this month, so that also will be not long before that's available. So
amazing, ton of great stuff, and obviously tons of other great reviews from Ramona, Bob, Brian, Val, and all the other folks. Editorials from Dahl and lists from Sailor and Kane. So news from Duke. Ton of great stuff on the website. Obviously, new episodes of the Canon. We will be back next week with another great episode. We're going to be talking Roman Holiday. Very excited for that conversation. We hope to see you there, as always, Screenagers. In the meantime, we will see all of you lovely folks in the wasteland.